The war began long before humanity even knew it was part of the game. The Galactic Dominion, an alliance of countless alien species, had long established its dominion over the known universe. They saw themselves as the rightful rulers, the caretakers of all sentient life. And humanity? They were nothing more than a primitive, inconsequential species clinging to a tiny blue rock. The elders of the Dominion had spoken many times of humans, those fragile, short-lived creatures who had only recently discovered space travel. They warned their people to leave Earth alone, to let the humans remain in their isolated corner of the galaxy. They are reckless, the elders had said. They are dangerous. Their emotions drive them more than logic. If they ever learn of the greater universe, they will not bow to our rule. They will fight. The younger leaders scoffed at the warnings. What could a species as young and weak as humanity possibly do? Their military was a joke. Their bodies were frail compared to the armored scales of the Krall, or the 4 arms of the Yundari, or the psionic minds of the Vial. Humanity was nothing, so they ignored the elders' warnings. They invaded. At first, it was easy. Earth's defenses crumbled before the might of the Dominion's warships. Major cities were turned to rubble in hours. Governments fell. Humanity's resistance was laughable. For a time, it seemed like the Dominion had been right to dismiss the elders' warnings. The war was nearly over before it had even begun. The Dominion had won. Or so they thought. But they didn't understand humanity. They didn't understand what centuries of war, struggle, and survival had done to this species. Because for humanity, war wasn't just strategy. It wasn't just technology. It was personal. And humanity had never lost a war without making the enemy bleed for every inch of ground. The first mistake the Dominion made was assuming humanity would surrender. The second mistake was underestimating just how far humans would go when pushed into a corner. The resistance began in the ruins, scattered, disorganized at first, but ruthless. The Dominion called it terrorism. Humanity called it survival. They adapted. Fast. Dominion soldiers, used to fighting predictable battles with structured tactics, found themselves facing an enemy that played by no rules. They poisoned supply lines, turned entire cities into traps, lured Dominion forces into abandoned buildings, and set explosives that tore war machines apart. The Dominion responded by sending more troops, heavier firepower, more brutal measures. That was their third mistake, because now humanity wasn't just fighting for survival, they were fighting for revenge. The captured Dominion soldiers learned firsthand what it meant to be on the other side of an unrelenting, desperate enemy. They weren't just executed, they were studied. Their weapons, their armor, their tactics. Humanity learned. And then they improved. It was slow at first. But then something terrifying happened. The scattered human forces started coordinating. Their attacks became more precise. They started using Dominion weapons against them, turning their own technology into instruments of destruction. And then the Dominion realized too late. The elders had been right. Because when humanity fights a war, they don't just fight to win, they fight to dominate. They fight until their enemies are nothing but ash. They fight until the battlefield belongs to them. And in the end, that's exactly what happened. Humanity didn't just push the Dominion off Earth. They followed them into space, and they didn't stop. Not until every Dominion world burned. Not until humanity ruled the battlefield. The first Dominion world to fall was Jandar Prime. It was their central military outpost, a fortress world protected by planetary shields, orbital defense grids, and millions of troops. The Dominion believed it was impenetrable. They were wrong. The humans had learned. They had studied every tactic, every weakness, and most importantly, they had adapted. They didn't launch a full-scale invasion like the Dominion expected. They didn't announce their arrival. They didn't send diplomats. Instead, they infiltrated. At first, no one even realized they were there. Dominion supply chains started failing. Communications were disrupted. Key officers went missing, only to be found days later with their throats slit or their bodies riddled with bullets from stolen Dominion weapons. And then, the real attack began. It started with the sky. The orbital defense grid, once thought unbreachable, flickered and failed. No one knew how. Later, it was discovered that human infiltrators had sabotaged the power relays from within, using knowledge they had gathered from captured soldiers. Then came the drop pods. The Dominion had never seen humans use this tactic before. Thousands of pods, each carrying a single soldier, rained down like a meteor storm. The ground forces barely had time to react before heavily armed humans burst out, tearing through defenses with brutal efficiency. Jandar Prime turned into a nightmare. Dominion soldiers, trained for conventional warfare, found themselves in an urban hellscape of collapsing buildings, ambushes, and relentless human fighters who refused to die easily. The Dominion's leaders panicked. They had always believed their superior numbers and technology made them untouchable. But now they were facing an enemy that fought like a cornered animal. Except this animal was intelligent, coordinated, and utterly ruthless. When the last Dominion general on Jandar Prime tried to surrender, he was met with cold, human eyes. "No peace," the human commander said. "Not after Earth." And then the executions began. The Dominion, for all their arrogance, had never been subjected to total war before. They had never faced an enemy that didn't just want victory, but vengeance. They had thought humanity was weak. Now they understood. But it was too late. The fall of Jandar Prime was only the beginning. Within months, humanity was no longer fighting for survival. They were on the offensive. Their captured Dominion ships were refitted with human ingenuity, turning them into weapons even deadlier than before. The tactics evolved. Now humanity was striking faster than the Dominion could react, hitting key targets, dismantling their command structure piece by piece. The Dominion started losing, not just battles, entire planets. Some alien species, realizing the inevitable, abandoned the Dominion, choosing neutrality over extinction. Others tried to fight to the last, believing they could outlast humanity's wrath. They were wrong. Because once the fire of war had been lit in humanity's heart, it would not be extinguished. And so the great empire that had ruled for centuries collapsed. And from its ruins, only one name remained: humanity. The Dominion's High Council sat in stunned silence. These were the rulers of a galactic empire that had lasted for millennia, their word once law across hundreds of star systems. They had commanded fleets so vast that entire worlds trembled at the mere sight of them, and now they were afraid. Not of another mighty empire, not of a species with overwhelming numbers or devastating technology. Number. They were afraid of the humans. "What do they want?" one council member whispered, his voice shaking. "Revenge," another replied grimly. It was no longer a war. It was a reckoning. Humanity was not negotiating. They did not accept surrenders. They did not conquer in the traditional sense. They burned. They erased. Every Dominion world they touched became another graveyard. The worst part? They learned. They didn't just win battles. They adapted after each one, becoming deadlier, more efficient, more unpredictable. Their tactics, at first a chaotic mess of guerrilla warfare and stolen technology, had now transformed into something far worse. Precision. They struck exactly where it hurt the most: logistics, leadership, key infrastructure. They knew which planets controlled fuel supplies, which stations coordinated fleets, which leaders were irreplaceable. And they removed them. The Council had ignored the Elders' warnings. They had dismissed the stories of humanity's past wars. their history of relentless conflict. Now they understood, and they were powerless to stop it. On the bridge of the Dominion's last great warship, High Admiral Xeric stood in silence, staring at the tactical display. His fleet, once the pride of the Dominion, was crumbling. The humans had surrounded them. A force 1/3 the size of his own had outmaneuvered him, forcing his ships into a corner of dead space where they had no escape. He had underestimated them, like so many others before him. The transmission from the enemy fleet crackled through his command deck. A human voice spoke, calm and composed. "Surrender, and we will make it quick." Xeric's tendrils tightened in rage. Surrender? To a species that had once been nothing but an afterthought? Impossible. He opened the fleet-wide comms channel. "We fight to the last ship," he ordered. His officers obeyed. But deep down, they all knew the truth. This was the end. The humans struck. Their ships, smaller and faster, wove through the Dominion's formations like predators picking off wounded prey. Precision strikes crippled engines, destroyed weapons systems, and shattered morale. Within minutes, the battle was over. Admiral Xeric sat in his chair as the ship around him burned. His last thoughts were not of victory or honor, only regret. They should have listened to the elders. Humanity did not stop with the Dominion's defeat. The galaxy watched in horror as the once mighty empire was wiped from existence. Some species begged for peace, others tried to resist. It did not matter. By the time humanity was done, the galaxy was no longer ruled by an alliance of alien civilizations. It belonged to one species alone. The new rulers of the battlefield. Humanity. The galaxy lay in ruins, and humanity stood at its center. Once the Dominion had controlled thousands of worlds, its fleets spanning across the stars like an unbreakable net. Now, those same worlds burned. Those same fleets had been reduced to drifting wreckage. The mighty empire that had once looked down on Earth as an insignificant rock had been shattered, its leaders hunted down, its armies slaughtered without mercy. There was no negotiation, no treaties, no rebuilding. The Dominion had tried to enslave humanity, to crush it before it could become a threat. They had underestimated what happens when humans are pushed to the brink. Now there was no more Dominion. Only humanity remained. The survivors, the species who had once been part of the Dominion but had either surrendered or managed to hide from humanity's wrath, gathered in secret. They met on a cold, barren moon in the far reaches of space, far from the destruction, far from the burning husks of former Dominion worlds. Representatives from a dozen species sat at a long, circular table, their faces grim. "We cannot let this continue," croaked an elder of the Vile, his voice trembling. His people had once ruled the Dominion's psychic warfare divisions. Now they were fugitives, hunted like animals. "They do not conquer," hissed a Crawl warlord, his voice laced with barely contained rage. "They do not occupy. They destroy. Entire planets gone. There is no diplomacy with them." The gathered leaders looked to the far side of the room, where a single shadowed figure stood. Unlike the others, this figure was not alien. It was human, a traitor to their own kind. "You have fought them," the Vile elder said, his pale, translucent hands trembling. "You know what they are capable of. Tell us, how do we stop them?" The human stepped forward, pulling down the hood of their cloak. Their face was marked with scars, their eyes dark with something the others couldn't quite place. "You don't," the human said simply. The room fell into stunned silence. "They are beyond stopping," the human continued. "You don't understand what you are facing. This is not an empire that wants control. This is not a species that will ever settle for peace." The Vile elder's eyes widened. "Then what do they want?" The human took a slow breath, staring down at the table. "They want revenge." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. The Kral warlord slammed a fist against the table. "Then we fight! We bring together the last remaining fleets! We make our stand before they wipe us all out!" The human chuckled softly. It was not a laugh of amusement. It was the laugh of someone who had already seen the inevitable. "You don't get it," the human said, shaking their head. "You think this is a war." They looked up, and their eyes, those dark, human eyes, pierced into every soul in the room. "This isn't a war anymore," the human said. "This is extinction." Across the galaxy, humanity continued its march. There were no grand speeches, no declarations of conquest. There was only action. One by one, the remaining Dominion planets vanished, wiped clean of life. Any species that dared resist was annihilated. Some fled. Entire fleets abandoned their homeworlds and vanished into the unknown, hoping to find refuge in the unexplored reaches of the universe. It did not matter. Humanity was patient. Humanity did not forget. And one by one, the stars fell silent. On the ruined remains of Earth, where the first battle had begun, the last surviving elder of the Dominion was brought before a council of human warlords. His body was broken, his once proud robes tattered. He had lived long enough to see his empire fall, to see his people erased from existence. A human general stepped forward, looking down at him with cold, emotionless eyes. The elder coughed, struggling to lift his head. His voice was weak, but he managed to whisper, "Why?" The human tilted his head. "Why?" he repeated. The elder's breathing was ragged. We surrender. Your revenge is complete. The Dominion is no more." His tired eyes met the human's gaze. "Why do you continue?" For a long moment the human said nothing. Then, finally, he knelt down, staring the elder in the eye. "You should have listened," the human said softly. And then he pulled the trigger. The elder's body slumped to the ground. The war was over. The galaxy belonged to humanity. And no one was left to challenge them. There was no cheering, no grand celebration. Humanity had won. The Dominion was gone. Their fleets, their armies, their leaders, all erased. The worlds they once ruled were silent now, nothing more than drifting husks of destruction. And yet, there was no joy in victory. Earth was a graveyard. What had started as a war for survival had become something else, something darker. At first, humanity had fought to ensure they would never be victims again. But at some point, that had changed. Revenge had consumed them, and now they were alone. The last Dominion world had fallen months ago. The final remnants of the once mighty empire had fled into the void, their ships disappearing into uncharted space. Some of humanity's commanders wanted to hunt them down, to finish what had been started. But others hesitated. Because, for the first time, they asked themselves the question no one had dared to voice. What happens now? Aboard the warship Iron Will, Admiral Sarah Kova stood at the command deck, staring at the map of the galaxy. It looked different now. Entire sectors, once teeming with life, had gone dark. What had once been battlefields were now wastelands. And humanity? Humanity had no more enemies left to fight. "Any word from the High Command?" one of her officers asked. She shook her head. "Number they're still deciding." The officer frowned. "Deciding what?" Sarah sighed. "What to do with the galaxy?" For centuries, the Dominion had ruled with an iron grip. They had controlled trade, set laws, dictated who thrived and who suffered. Now, all of that was gone. There were still independent species, neutral civilizations that had managed to avoid the war. They were watching, waiting to see what humanity would do next. Would they rebuild? Would they take the Dominion's place and rule as conquerors, or would they keep going? Would they turn their weapons on anyone who might one day challenge them? Sarah didn't know the answer, and that terrified her. On the barren world of Roth 7, a small colony of survivors huddled in the ruins of an old Dominion outpost. They were not soldiers. They were not leaders. They were simply those who had managed to escape the war. Refugees. One of them, a young Vale named Yirak, stood watch at the edge of the settlement. His people had once been proud, their empire stretching across dozens of systems. Now they were little more than scattered ghosts, hiding from the monsters they had created. From the humans. His hands trembled as he spotted movement on the horizon. A ship, descending through the thick clouds of smoke that still clung to the planet's surface. It was human. Panic spread through the camp. Some ran for weapons, others for shelter. "They've found us," one of the elders whispered. Yirak felt his heart pound in his chest. This was it. The end. The ship landed. The hatch opened. And then, nothing. No soldiers. No attack. Just a single crate dropped onto the ground outside the ship. Then, without a word, the ship lifted off and disappeared into the sky. Slowly, cautiously, Yirak approached the crate. He reached out, pried it open. Inside were food supplies, medical kits, blankets. For a long time he simply stared. Had the humans spared them? Were they offering mercy? Or was this something else? A warning? A message? We decide who lives now. Yirak clenched his fists. The Dominion had called humanity weak once. They had laughed at them, ignored the warnings of the elders, and now? Now the fate of the galaxy rested in the hands of its new masters. Humanity had become something far more terrifying than the Dominion ever was. Because they weren't just conquerors. They were survivors. And survivors did whatever it took to ensure they were never threatened again. The universe held its breath. For the first time in history, there was no dominant galactic empire, no ruling council, no web of alliances to balance power. The Dominion had been erased, their infrastructure, their laws, their entire legacy, swept away as if it had never existed. And humanity, the victors, stood at the center of it all. The remaining species watched in silence, waiting to see what would happen next. Would the humans take the throne the Dominion had left behind? Would they establish themselves as the new rulers of the stars? Or had they become something else entirely? On Earth, what remained of humanity's leaders gathered in the underground city of New Bastion. The surface was still too dangerous, still scarred from the war that had nearly wiped them out. At the head of the War Council, General Adrian Voss sat in silence as the others argued around him. "We need to rebuild," one voice insisted. "We've won, but our worlds are in ruin. Earth is barely habitable. Our colonies are stretched thin. If we don't focus on recovery, we'll collapse under our own weight." Another general shook her head. "And what happens when the survivors of the Dominion regroup? What happens when the scattered remnants of their fleets decide to take revenge? We must strike first. Finish what we started." Voss sighed. He had heard these arguments before, over and over. Some wanted peace, others wanted security through domination. The problem was, they didn't know what they were anymore. The war had shaped them into something new, something dangerous. They had become predators, perfected by necessity, by suffering, by the relentless need to survive. And now, with no one left to fight, that instinct had nowhere to go. His thoughts were interrupted by an incoming transmission, a live broadcast sent across all human channels. It was from Iron Will, Admiral Sarah Kova's flagship. Voss frowned and tapped a command on his console, bringing the transmission to the central screen. The image flickered, and there she was, standing on the bridge of her warship, her expression cold, unreadable. I have made a decision, she said, her voice steady. Murmurs filled the council chamber. Who was she to declare a decision? But Voss knew better. Kova wasn't just a soldier. She was a symbol. She had led humanity's fleets to victory, orchestrated the downfall of the Dominion's core worlds. If anyone had the right to decide the future, it was her. She continued. The war is over, but our enemies still exist, scattered, broken, hiding in the dark. We could leave them be. We could take what we've won and focus on rebuilding. She paused, letting the weight of those words sink in. But that is not what we do. Silence. The Dominion never offered us mercy. They saw us as insects, an infestation to be exterminated. If we allow them to escape, to grow in the shadows, they will return. Not in our generation, perhaps, but one day. And when they do, they will be stronger. She leaned forward, her eyes burning with something deep, something dangerous. I refuse to let that happen. Voss's stomach tightened. He already knew what she was about to say. We finish this. We do not let the past repeat itself. We erase the Dominion from history, from memory, from existence itself. Murmurs turned into protests. You're talking about genocide, one of the counselors said, horrified. No, Kova replied. I'm talking about survival. Another voice broke in. And when they're gone? What then? Who do we turn our weapons on next? Kova's expression darkened. You think I don't ask myself that question every day? But I know one thing. We will never be victims again. The transmission ended. The room was silent. And in that moment, Voss understood. This war had never been about victory. It had been about fear, and now fear was all they had left. Across the galaxy, the hunt began. Humanity did not settle into peace. They did not rebuild cities or plant flags on conquered worlds. They searched. They hunted. The survivors of the Dominion, the last remnants of a broken empire, were found one by one. No mercy was given. No terms were offered. Entire fleets vanished in the dead of space. Refugee ships were intercepted and destroyed. Hidden colonies were discovered and erased. It was a purge. It was systematic. It was terrifying, and the rest of the galaxy could only watch in horror as the new rulers of the stars completed their work. Because deep down, they knew the truth. The Dominion had ignored the Elders' warnings, and now humanity was the warning. There was no escape. From the icy moons of the Karsus cluster to the scorched wastelands of the Drachnos belt, humanity's fleets spread like an unstoppable tide, hunting down the last remnants of the Dominion. The galaxy had become a graveyard, the once mighty empire reduced to whispers, its survivors fleeing from shadow to shadow. But there were no shadows dark enough, no depths deep enough. Humanity found them all, and humanity erased them. On the bridge of the Iron Will, Admiral Sarah Kova watched the destruction unfold. The last Dominion holdout in the Rivok system had fallen. The planet below was burning, its final defenders annihilated in a swift, brutal assault. The hunt was almost over. But even as victory drew closer, something unsettled her. Admiral, one of her officers called. Incoming distress signal. It's not from a Dominion source. Kova narrowed her eyes. Put it through. The holoscreen flickered, revealing a trembling, wide-eyed figure. An elder of the Zeleri, one of the neutral species that had never been part of the Dominion. Please, the elder begged. We mean you no harm. We have never raised a hand against humanity, but we are afraid. You must stop. The war is over. The Dominion is gone. There is no more threat. Kova remained silent, her expression unreadable. Are we next? The elder whispered. The question hung in the air like a blade. Kova ended the transmission without a word. For the first time in years, uncertainty crept into her mind. What were they becoming? Across the galaxy, the rumors spread. It was said that humanity no longer had enemies, only prey. It was said that even species who had remained neutral were now sending emissaries, desperate to prove their loyalty before the hunters turned their gaze upon them. It was said that there was no longer a council, no longer diplomacy, only the silent, looming presence of Earth's fleets, watching, waiting. On a dying world, deep in uncharted space, the last Dominion warlord knelt before a human officer. His body was thin, his face gaunt. His people had once been conquerors. Now they were nothing but dust. The human watched him with cold, calculating eyes. "You ran for a long time." The warlord coughed, blood staining his lips. "We should have listened," he whispered. The human nodded. "Yes." The warlord took a shaking breath. "Will you rebuild?" The human said nothing. The warlord laughed, a hollow, broken sound. "No, of course you won't. There's nothing left to build." The human raised his weapon. The warlord met his gaze. "Then what will you do?" The answer was quiet. "We will watch." A single shot rang out, and with it, the last piece of the old galaxy died. The war was over. There was no longer an enemy, no longer a dominion, no longer a battle to fight. Humanity had no rivals left, no equals. And that was the most terrifying thing of all. Because once a species learns to become hunters, they do not stop. They only wait. The stars were silent. For the first time in history, the galaxy had no war, no conquerors, no empire rising to take the place of the fallen dominion. And yet, peace did not come. Because the ones who had won the war were not builders, they were not rulers, they were something else entirely. They were predators. And the galaxy knew it. On the bridge of the Iron Will, Admiral Sarah Kova stared out into the endless void. The war was over. The last Dominion forces had been wiped from existence, their legacy reduced to ash. But the silence that followed was deafening. She had expected to feel relief. She had expected to feel something. Instead, there was only emptiness. A soft chime broke her thoughts. "Admiral," a voice said, "the Council is requesting an update." Kova exhaled slowly. "Put them through." The holoscreen flickered to life, displaying a dozen shadowed figures, humanity's remaining leaders, those who had survived the war. One of them, Counselor Hayes, leaned forward. "Is it done?" Kova nodded. "The last Dominion holdout has been eliminated. There are no survivors." A heavy silence followed. Then another voice, colder than the void itself. "And what of the others?" Kova's hands tightened into fists. She knew what they meant. The neutral species. The ones who had stayed out of the war. The ones who had watched from the sidelines, waiting to see who would emerge victorious. Now they trembled in fear. "We are being watched," she said carefully. "Every civilization that remains is holding its breath, waiting for our next move." Hayes exhaled. "And?" Kova hesitated. "We could rebuild," she said. "We could create something new, a future where humanity is not feared, but respected, where we do not have to be hunters forever." Another counselor scoffed. "That is a fantasy. We have spent too long in the dark, too long fighting. The galaxy will never see us as anything other than what we have become." "What we have become," Kova repeated, her voice sharp. "Or what we have chosen to be." No one answered. Then Hayes spoke again. "The decision has already been made." Kova's stomach turned. "The fleets will not stand down," he continued. "Humanity will not lower its weapons. We will watch, and we will ensure that no threat to us, real or potential, ever rises again." She had expected this, but hearing it spoken aloud, set in stone, made it feel final. "The others fear us," she said softly. "Do we really intend to prove them right?" Hayes leaned closer, his expression unreadable. "They ignored their elders' warnings once. They ignored the threat we could become. Now, we are the warning." The transmission ended. Kova stood there for a long time. The war was over, but humanity's hunt had just begun. Across the galaxy, the message was clear. Humanity did not claim the throne the Dominion had left behind. They did not send diplomats. They did not issue decrees. They simply remained, watching, waiting. No civilization dared to expand. No world dared to rise. Every species knew that the moment they became a potential threat, humanity would be there, silent, unstoppable. And then, one by one, species began to vanish. Some called it paranoia. Some said they had simply gone into hiding, retreating into the deepest corners of space. But others knew the truth. The galaxy had never feared the Dominion, not like this, because the Dominion had wanted power. Humanity wanted nothing. Nothing, except the certainty that they would never be threatened again. The galaxy had never known true silence until now. For the first time in history, there were no wars, no rebellions, no rising empires. The stars were quiet, the remaining civilizations holding their breath, afraid to even whisper their ambitions into the void, because they knew humanity was listening, watching, waiting. Admiral Sarah Kova stood alone in the observation deck of the Iron Will, staring into the vast emptiness before her. The war was over, but there was no peace. Only fear. She had spent her life fighting, leading fleets into battle, hunting down the remnants of the Dominion until there was nothing left. And now, with every enemy gone, there was nowhere left to turn, nothing left to fight. Humanity had won. And in doing so, they had become something far worse than conquerors. They had become ghosts, a silent, invisible force that haunted the galaxy, ensuring that no one ever dared to challenge them again. But Kova had seen the reports. Entire species vanishing without a trace, worlds going dark, refugee ships setting course for deep space and never being heard from again. They said humanity wasn't responsible. But Kova knew better. This wasn't victory. This was extinction, drawn out over years, over decades, not by war, not by fire, but by the slow, creeping terror that humanity had left behind. No empire would ever rise again, because no one dared to try. In the depths of space, on a forgotten world where no one dared to tread, a small colony of survivors huddled in the shadows. They did not send transmissions. They did not leave their planet. They did not even speak the name of their oppressors. Because the warnings of the elders had come true, the Dominion had ignored the humans once. And now, there was nothing left but silence. Because when the galaxy finally understood what humanity had become, it was already too late. The hunt had never ended. And it never would.